Let's do it. This is my second time talking about fax at TED Summits. So, I wanted to start off with an important date in fax history, and that date is, there we go, 11/7/2017. And I assume that everybody here knows why that's an important day in fax history, and obviously that's because opera singer Audrey Luna sang the highest ever note at the Met Opera in New York City. I know you're a huge fan. Love the opera, right? It was an A above high C, and an A above high C, if you're thinking this through and you're thinking in terms of fax, you're going to remember that A above high C is at 1760 hertz, right? And the CNG tone, right, that would be at 1100 hertz. And the CED tone would be at about 2100 hertz. And for everybody who doesn't know, although I'm sure that everybody does, those are both fax tones, and they're really important. So the question will be, why is 11/7/2017 an important day, right? And the reason there is because over in Faxio land, we were sitting around. It was a normal day. And then all of a sudden we noticed that our calls to South Korea, our calls to South Korea started shooting up. And, we do a bunch of faxing in South Korea anyway, and we facilitate a lot of different, companies that are out there. But we saw from a bunch of accounts, a handful of accounts, there was a ton of traffic that was all of a sudden happening over in South Korea. And so whenever on a platform, whenever you see a kind of like, I don't remember who, Chris or something said earlier, whenever you see a couple of accounts that all of a sudden start making a ton of calls, and in this case it was all to one particular number, you think fraud. So that's what we thought. So we got on the horn, and I grabbed some of the I grabbed a couple of the email addresses. There were about 10, and we sent a note over to them. We said, hey, listen, it looks like your account has been compromised, and there's a bunch of fraud going on, so we're going to shut that down for you, and we're going to turn off your API access. And usually what happens in fraud accounts when this happens is you send that off, it goes down, that's the end of, and then you try to figure out how you're going to do better next time. But we really couldn't figure out what happened, because it's pretty rare all of a sudden that that random accounts, right, like it's usually one player, a couple of bad players, something, but that doesn't usually happen at like a particular time. In this case, I don't remember exactly what time it was, but it would be something like right at, say, 7 o'clock at night. All of a sudden there was a ton of traffic, and so we couldn't figure out why that would happen. And interestingly, in this particular case, one of the accounts came back to us, right, and he said, hey, listen, don't shut me down. It's not fraudulent. So let the calls keep going. We said, all right, well, that's a little bit strange. So we went back and we turned the account back on because he just responded back to us. So, all right, fine. Maybe you're totally legit. So he came back to us and he said, hey, listen, I really appreciate you turning on my API access, but I've got a whole bunch of other accounts, and if you could turn the access on for all of those other accounts too, that would be really great. And it was at that point, so we already kind of thought that there was a bunch of fraud going on, so we went back to them, we went back to him and said, hey, listen, this is pretty unusual. Why would you need, we're an API. So for those who don't know, maybe I should have started there. Faxio, before it was acquired, and even still, and even today, is, I would like to say, the preeminent faxing API. And so last time I spoke about why it's so great, and I'd love to go over that again to toot my own horn, but I won't. But essentially that was happening. So what was going on was he was making a ton of API calls. And so the strange thing here that was happening was, it's weird enough that there were a whole bunch of accounts, but why would anybody need a whole bunch of accounts? We're an API, just use one account and make as many API calls as you want. Why would you need multiple accounts? And so it was at that time that I guess I got a bit of a, I don't know if I'd call it a history lesson, but a bit of a lesson about other countries. And what really happened there was I learned that in 1957, the country of South Korea enacted conscription. Now, I've put it up here, and you don't have to take my word for it. I can even quote to you. I got it from right here. You guys can all type that in later. You don't have to. They enacted conscription. So everybody in between 18 and 48 has to go to the army. Now here's the rub. This guy figured out, I guess, or maybe it's public, I don't really know, but it must be public at some level, figured out that if you are going to be drafted into the army, there's a particular program that allows you to avoid or get an exemption from that army, and I guess you get either a desk job or you go work at some other firm off in the army, or you go work at some other firm, you get some type of exemption. So here's what he did. He figured out that the only way that they accept these applications, for some reason, the only way that the Korean government accepts these applications is through fax. It's one fax number. They open it up at 7 o'clock at night in South Korea, and everybody who wants one of these jobs has to fax through to this number. Now, in general, that's not such a bad queuing system. I give the South Koreans some pretty serious kudos for that. It's pretty smart. It's a fax machine. It can only, they have an actual fax machine, I guess, and it can only handle one call. So if you really want the first couple people to get through, it's a pretty good way to just let that happen. So this guy figured out, well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to hammer the crap out of this machine. So and that's exactly what he did. Now, we had no idea that that was going on, but inherently what he was doing is he had all of these accounts, and all of the accounts called the one particular number as many times as he possibly could call them. Now, that was fun, and I actually hunted him down online. Here's a picture of him. It cost him about, so I forget how long this went for, maybe about 10 total minutes. It cost him about $2,000. He made about 10,000 phone calls. He maxed out 4 of his credit cards and used about 8 accounts. So I only know that he maxed out his credit cards because he kept he had all these accounts, and they were all charging, or we were charging his credit card every time he was making more calls, and then all the cards started to fail. I assume he maxed out his credit cards. And then, after whatever it was, another 10 minutes later, we said, hey, listen, this is kind of getting out of hand. And he came back to us, that was it. And then we didn't hear from him until the next day. When we got this email, he says, hey, listen, I appreciate all of this. You saved my life. I got through, and I have one of these jobs, and you don't have to worry about it. By the way, you can keep all that money that I sent to you. It's all yours. Have a good time. So I think that the moral of the story there is that we beat South Korea. I think that's what we all learned. Anyway, so I bring up these stories because Alan loves these stories about fax. And the thing about fax is that people love to say that fax is dead and fax is a dying industry. And, why would anybody use fax? I don't use fax and that whole thing. And I get up on stages and I tell people all the time, I don't often send faxes. Why would I send faxes? I don't have to do. But, I would assume like this, right? Whoops. Yeah. I would imagine that when somebody tells you to send a fax, you feel like, how are you even going to send a fax, right? What would you even do to send it? And even if they did tell you to send it, you'd be like, screw sending fax. I hate it. Like, why would I want to do it, right? Most people really have like this visceral reaction to faxing. But the joke of that is that I like to tell people that faxing comes up in mission critical situations, right? And I realize that this particular image that I've used for mission critical might be somewhat of an exaggeration. Or is it? Because I'll tell you this, when North Korea wanted to threaten South Korea, this is recent, wanted to threaten South Korea with war, they did so by fax. And let me assure you, nothing says threatening nuclear war as intensely as a piece of paper printing out, right? It would be scary if that was you, right? True story. I didn't even doctor this one. But you can see that that's actually indeed exactly what they did. They threatened to go to war via fax. So when I say mission critical, what I actually mean by mission critical is I mean that revenue's involved. And so what I mean by that is take a lab. Quest Diagnostics, right? You go into your doctor, you get a lab, and there's lab work done, and what happens there is that the lab eventually sends that report back off to a doctor's office. Now, the way that lab is actually going to get paid is by the doctor receiving that document, right? And a similar type thing happens when the doctor sends a prescription off to the pharmacy, right? And a whole bunch of these interactions actually happen by fax. Right, you wouldn't inherently assume it, but that's actually what happens. And there are companies out there, there are large companies out there that make their nut by sending faxes or by streamlining parts of those processes, right? So the McKessons, the Cardinal Healths, all these guys, that's what's happening. Underneath, a lot of them are just using fax. And so in this particular case, right, when you kind of assume that faxing looks like this, right, with somebody who's standing at a feeder and has the document, and they take the document, they put it in the feeder, and they debit it, and they send it. And for you, and for me, and for everybody who isn't one of these people, that's kind of annoying, because when somebody tells you to send a fax, you're thinking, like, I don't have a fax machine that I can go send a fax with. But inherently, we all end up using fax all the time, because when you look at at different companies, right, the way that they are able to streamline processes, and part of what we pay for when we use those services to streamline those processes, is that underneath, what they're doing is they're taking these documents that you're filling out online and typing things into, and maybe you're signing with a mouse, and they're faxing them off in different places, right? They're filling out that paperwork for you, they're filing it, they're sending it, they're faxing it, and that's how they get it done. Can't promise you that's what's happening in Rocket Mortgage, but so that's what's happening, right? And so people are always surprised when you kind of tell them that, in fact, the faxing industry is not only alive and not only not dying, but is actually growing and has been growing and will continue to grow and is projected to grow. Because all of the times when you assume that you're not using fax, oh, I don't have to do it like that, you're actually just using fax. You just don't know that you're using fax. I'll pause, I'll let you take the picture. Right, and so what ends up happening is that every millennial's answer to faxing is, won't email kill fax? Right, that's kind of the standard question. I don't understand. If I have the document, I can get it into my computer. Can't I just email it? Why can't I just email it? And instead of me going through a whole bunch of cases here and kind of walking through why that's not inherently true, and the legal reasons and the privacy implications and all of that kind of fun stuff that everybody likes to talk about, I'm gonna give it to you this way. I would tell you to consider this. Rather than think about fax to email, I would ask you to think about what fax replaces. So I would posit that fax replaces mail. Mail works really well when you need a document. So if anybody here has been sued before, which I'm sure nobody has, then you guys all know that somebody shows up at your office with a FedEx, like overnight FedEx envelope full of documents, and that's what's given to you. In fact, even if you get an email, you also get that. Not that I would know, I've never been sued, but that's actually right. But that's what you get. And when corporations do all kinds of things with documents, whenever that happens, they always want to have a document. That document is always sent, and it's usually sent via. Well, I don't know if it's sent via FedEx, but it's sent via something. You get a document. You get the actual document. And so inherently, fax works really well in a lot of those cases. And it's used, in fact, in the legal industry in a lot of those cases, because there are places when you want an actual document to print out at the other side. You don't inherently care that it prints, but you inherently care that there's a document at the other side, right? You don't want it to go sitting in somebody's inbox. You don't want it to happen by email. And so if you look at it and say, all right, well, fax kind of replaces mail, then it works out really well, because fax is much faster than mail, right? No matter how many pages it is or whatever it's going to be, the mail, the post office is not going to get it there, in less than a day. Right? And then you need to have a different service, but that's what it does. And so that's how I'd kind of challenge you to think of it. Rather than email, doesn't that replace fax? And I'll get to that in a second. But I would look at it and say, it kind of replaces mail. Wherever there's a document where you want to have the actual document, fax ends up working out really, really well there. And so the case that I would give you Or the challenge that then I would give you is like this, right? Let's say that you had a 12-page document. Let's say I had the actual document here, and I gave it to you. I gave you a 12-page document, all right? Don't smile. You don't even know what's on the document. But I give you a 12-page document, right? And I tell you that you've got to send it off to Michael here, right, in Scranton. So what's the process that you would use? And if I told you that you had to get it there pretty quickly, what's the process you would use to get it? Let's say that you wanted to opt for email, okay? So now here's what you've got to do. You've got to go find a scanner, right? Or you could use your phone. You could probably use your phone, right? You got a phone? What do you have? An iPhone? Why do you have to look down at your... Okay, you've got an iPhone. Okay, so you take your phone, you use your phone, you start sending... All right, so you start taking this. Now, when you've done this, right, and I'm sure you've done it before. I know you send faxes all the time. So here's what you do, right? You've got to take it, then you've got to put it down on your desk or like a chair, maybe use the floor or something that has like a pretty standard background, because if you don't use the standard background, then it's going to like take the whole thing, it's not going to know, and then you're going to have to use like your finger to like pinch and zoom all around to make sure that it gets like the whole document. You know what I'm talking about, right? You know. And so then you've got to do that, and then you've got to do all the 12 pages. Then you take the 12 pages, then you've got to get that. And so if you've got an iPhone, then you can attach it into the email, but so you've got to go through that. But sometimes it puts it into like your gallery, or it puts it in files, then you've got to go there and get it from there. But it's annoying because it's a picture, but it thinks it's a picture because it is a picture, but really it's like a scan, right? But so then you've got to go there and you've got to grab the file, and then sometimes you've got to put them all together. Right now, most of them have gotten better, so you don't have to put them all together. You know what I'm talking about? You know what I'm talking about? You know what I'm talking about? Well, you need to scan more 12-page documents. Okay, so that's what happens then, and then you put in the email address, you send off the email, and that's it, right? That's the process, roughly, right? And that's no problem. With the fax machine, it's four things. You take the document, you put it in the feeder, you type in the numbers, and then you hit send. That's the whole process. There is nothing else. So faxing really sucks when you don't have a fax machine, that I agree with. But when you have a fax machine sitting in front of you, it actually works really well and is really great to use and is really simple. And the more interesting piece about that is that if you needed to take the document and send it off to Scranton, Pennsylvania, here are the steps that you would take, right? You take it, you put it in the feeder, you push the numbers, you push send, and it sends it. Let's say that you need to take that same document, right? Let's say that you need to take that same document that you've got, and you've got to send it off to Slough. Every time, Slough. I just love coleslaw. And you need to send it off to Slough. It's the exact same process. Literally nothing. Well, something changes. The numbers change. Maybe it's a couple more numbers. But otherwise, it's the same. It's the same process, and it works just as well. And so, long story short, especially if you were to take that and play it opposite mail, so anybody here who sent mail internationally knows that that process really sucks. So, faxing works out really well in that particular case too. That's my whole spiel. I'm sticking with it. Take the document, put it in the feeder, put the phone number in, and then you're done. Who's got some fax questions? I've got answers. I'd also like to point out, I don't only do fax, but I'm happy, but I do love presenting fax. Nothing is, let me assure you, nothing's as much fun as presenting fax. Yes? What would you say is the active user population of fax globally? What would I...
Have an estimate of the active user population of fax today.
What would I estimate?
Globally. Are we talking 1 million, 10 million, 100 million?
So it's, for me, this is how I'd answer that question. Inherently, the place that I sit does not give me a great insight into single active users. Because the customers that I usually service are enterprises, carriers that are doing it, and so they're kind of aggregating it. Now, if I had to guess, I would surely say into the millions. I don't think there's, that definitely happens. And then there's the question about how you would split it, right? Based on what I was showing earlier, right? Would you say that if you order food on your phone, you order food on your phone? Well, you're a bad example. Who here orders food on their phone? What service? You use the service? Okay. Pretty much whatever service you use, they will get the order from your phone to the restaurant by fax. Not always, not exclusively, because a bunch of them are trying to give out a bunch of iPads, and there's always that, and then these places all have like 30 iPads, and they don't love that either, blah, blah, blah. Long story, but, well, I can't speak. Anyway, point is that a lot of the ways that that works ends up being by fax. So I guess the question that I would ask back to you is, would you consider that an active user of fax? Oh, well, then I would say it's into the hundreds of millions. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. That's kind of the weird thing there, which is that everybody kind of hates fax, but the point is that underneath, a lot of the ways that this is getting done is actually by fax. They've just kind of lifted that piece off and then given you a different interaction point.
Yeah, because I was about to correct you. I was saying it's hundreds of millions, not millions. I mean, in millions in Japan.
Yeah,
People send notes to each other, handwritten notes, simply because, and then fax it because it's more personal. In South America.
Yeah, absolutely.
Massive.
I would say like this: every doctor in the U.S. has a fax number. So all of these places have fax numbers. So yeah, that's true. Yeah, and
RCS.
wah, wah. But I thought Google just made a big announcement about RCS or something, didn't they? Aren't they going to try to push it again? I mean, they're constantly pushing.
I expect to see that in some of your next tweets.
That's true. That should be my next presentation. I should do a presentation about RCS versus fax. That would be good.